What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime, except for maybe today, because today we're bringing you the creme de la creme. There are no better guests than this trio here today. People come here just to hear Dr. Ann Burgess, Dr. Gary Bricado, and of course, Jeff Wood. These are STS Nation's Mindhunters, and they are back better than ever. Now, just a little bit of background here. Surviving the Survivor launched into true crime with the Dan Markel murder case. The trigger man in that murder case of an FSU law professor back in 2014, and some of the trials are just about to begin of the ex-brother-in-law. But the trigger man, who has since been convicted, was a low-level criminal named Sigfredo Garcia. His accomplice and the person who hired Sigfredo for the job was a leader in a national gang syndicate connected to much more heinous crimes. His name is Luis Rivera, a member of the Latin Kings. So the question begs, how do gangs operate, and why do members kill so frequently and with such ease? And why should you care? The answers might frighten you. Again, best guests are here to break it all down. Before I tell you again who they are and the full background, some of the video you're going to see tonight, we're going to play a video you might find disturbing. So just keep that in mind because we are going to show you some things. But the star of the show tonight, usually it is Dr. Ann and Gary, but Jeff Wood takes center stage. He is a retired FBI special agent out of Boston, one of the preeminent man of knowledge, you could say, when it comes to gang and gang violence. He is a seasoned investigator, spent his entire career basically focused on gangs in and around the Boston area. And we know that some of those suburbs can be rough indeed. Dr. Ann Burgess. She's an internationally recognized pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse, and the author of A Killer by Design, Murderers, Mindhunters, and My Quest to Decipher the Criminal Mind. Among her many awards and accolades in 2016, she was named a living legend. Are you a living legend? I doubt it, but Ann Burgess is, and she was named that by the American Academy of Nursing. She has also worked with the FBI Academy and their special agents to study serial offenders and the links between child abuse, juvenile delinquency, and subsequent perpetration. And that show, Mindhunters on Netflix, is loosely based on some of the work that Ann Burgess did. So now you know. And then we've got Dr. Gary Bricado. He is presently a visiting scholar at Boston College, where he collaborates with Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Victor Petreka on forensic research. They've examined crimes such as murder, including serial killing, sex offenses, mutilation and dismemberment, and the insanity defense. He is currently serving as a consultant on a grant-funded project by Dr. Burgess and Dr. Petreka, analyzing murders involving asphyxiation by strangulation and other means. Gary studies, among other things, how violent thoughts and actions emerge in psychotic versus non-psychotic persons, and he is the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. The bottom line here is these are the very best guests in all of true crime who really know their material inside out. Back to the Dan Markel case, and then I'm going to let Jeff take the reins here. Luis Rivera went by the gang name King Tato. He was the head of the North Miami tribe of the group. It's a Chicago-based gang that operates in at least 39 states, including Florida, and probably more by now. The group works mostly in narcotics distribution and operation that includes assault, robbery, burglary, and identity theft. They've also been linked to murders, kidnappings, and witness tampering. Now, Luis Rivera was convicted in 5 separate drug cases before he was 17 years old and spent most of his youth on drugs, that all according to federal court documents. His lawyer, prior to the trial involving the whole Dan Markel murder case, wrote that Luis Rivera is uneducated, cannot read or write, and has been on the streets with little family guidance since before his teenage years. He further was diagnosed with schizophrenia since he was age 10. Jeff, you are muted. I'll have you unmute yourself. And without further ado, does Luis Rivera, who's actually, he lives not far from where I live, and they're really two different worlds, does he sort of meet the profile of a typical gang banger? And is that still a phrase, gang banging?
I still refer to gang members as gang bangers. Yes, that's still a phrase that's actively used. And I would say there's several, and we'll get into it a little later, of profiles. You can't say one profile fits every gang member. There's a whole slew of different profiles to gang members. So yes, do gangs like certain people who are kind of more what we consider psychotic, more on the edge? Of course they do, because they have people that they want to go, as soon as they give an order, off they go to do their drive-by shooting, killing, etc. No questions asked. But gang members, you have some that if they chose a different path in life, they would be CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. They're smart, they're charismatic, they've got leadership qualities, because they leave these gangs to take over a territory. They run that territory, they make money, they're having wars with rival gangs, they're doing all sorts of things. So to say that they're all psychotic is just, it's not safe to say that, because some people don't meet that role. So there's a lot to that. If we want to get into it, I can talk a little bit about the gang problem in the United States right now, and what we've seen changing in the country.
100%. I'm just going to start to put out some of these comments here. STS Nation is firing our way. Celeste Shanahan writes, Mindhunters, one of the best shows ever on Netflix. Would love another season of it. And you're muted. They were asking if there's going to be another season. You don't have the inside scoop, do you, Ann? You got to unmute yourself. Let me do that for you. Okay.
The latest is no. A lot of people want another season, but and I think Gary can speak to this too. It doesn't look like they're going to.
And gangs, we're going to get to that, but I know people love you and love that show. So how did they come to you and ask you to consult on this? How did it all play out behind the scenes? What can you share with us about Mindhunters?
They developed their own background on the show. They did not come to me, and I'm not sure. I don't think they went to John Douglas. They just developed their own script for it, and they that's my knowledge on it.
But take us back to that time period. Was it mid 1970s? And because I'm very intrigued by this. What were you doing, and how did this all come about? I know it's probably a 5-hour story, but curious to get your thoughts and background on this.
I was invited down to lecture down at the FBI Academy as an outside, what you would call an outside consultant. And I was to talk on the rape victim, because they had just been given the mandate to train rape investigators with their special agents. So they didn't know much about rape from the victim side. And so that's how I actually, my first times down there, that later developed into helping them do some research. And my role in it was to help with the methodology. What do we want to know? What were our goals? What were the research questions? And that's where we eventually wrote a book on 36 serial killers.
Super fascinating. Another comment here by Jeannie Castellano. This case, meaning the Markel, is a no-brainer. I do believe in innocent before guilty, but this has so much proof the Adelsons did this. It is so sad. Followed by an important comment here from JP. Dan Markel's murder was not a gang hit. I don't think anyone said that. It was orchestrated by his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson, and her family. She is not convicted, could be indicted, possibly, but the brother has been charged and is going on trial in April for hiring, using Katie Magbanawa, the intermediary, for hiring both Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. And Luis Rivera is a known gang member. So, Jeff, back to you. I know you want to discuss some of the broader topics. What is a gang? Why do people join gangs? Things of that nature. So please take the reins.
Well, I would say to answer that question, it wasn't a gang hit in the sense that this gang member went out to go and hit a rival gang member. However, gangs are about making money. One of their specialties is murder for hire. I can make money for murder for hire. So yes, when you want to say this wasn't a gang hit in the sense that I went out as a Latin king, let's say, and go after a gangster disciple in that sense, but someone came to me, hired me to go out and help facilitate a murder. So that's where the gangs come in. Gangs are if a gang can make money by breaking the law, they're going to do it. So that's where we're saying here the problem with gangs, gang violence, etc. So if you want to throw up the first slide about the gang problem, which so people can read it as I'm talking, but when we look at it, gangs and their violence that they create is a rising epidemic in our country, right? So we want to go to the next slide. So here's just a few facts. You go back to 1991, we had 5,000 gangs. Now we have 33,000 gangs in the country. Our membership has exploded. So when we look at it, back in 1980, we knew we had around 250,000 known gang members. Today, we know we have 1.4 million known gang members. So when I want to say known, that means how many don't we know, right? So for the FBI, for law enforcement as a whole, when we talk about known gang members, we just can't say, oh, there's a guy on the street, he's wearing red, he's in blood gang territory, he's a blood. We need a lot more than that. So law enforcement has created a checklist and they have numbers. So I'm going to make it easy right now because I don't have one near me. But let's say you need, out of 20 points, 12 points to become a known gang member. And we have to verify that. So one of them would be associating with gang members. So if I associate with a bunch of bloods, being an associate would get me maybe 1 point. So now I've got 11 more points to go before I can be considered a known gang member. So there's lots of little different things out there that will add up and give you numbers. Even if I admit, yes, I'm a blood, that may get me maybe 8 points, but it still won't push me to the magic number of this person we can fully identify as a known gang member. But it'll get me more points because of the weight we're doing. So again, here we are in a country with 360 million people, and we know we have 1.4 million gang members, but there's so many more we don't know. And that's why we say it to this point. And when we look over each year, cities that have 100,000 or more people, their gang killings, the murders that are taking place are increasing by about 13% a year. That's staggering. And so when you look at across the country, 48% of violent crime committed in this country is by gang members. That's across the country. You have cities such as Chicago, LA, where that number is over 90%.
Wow, that's insane. Hey, Jeff, let me bounce in for 1 second because Gary Bricado has never gone 13 minutes and 35 seconds on a panel without saying anything. Gary, Dr. Bricado to me. Jeff was telling me that definitions need to change a lot when it comes to murder. So how do you define the difference between these gang mass murders versus serial killings versus plain mass murders? Why don't you open that can up and explain to the audience, because no one knows this better than you.
Well, first of all, we've got to distinguish between what we mean by mass murder and serial killing before we can talk about subtypes. So first of all, serial killing, according to the current definition, simply means that a person is killed twice with a cooling off period between the killings. And there's no mention of motive in the current definition, so that a member of a gang was killed, two people or more, let's say, separated by something like a month between two of the killings, is a serial killer. I'm not crazy about the current definition, but that's the current definition. And in its original form, the definition required 3 victims separated in time by cooling off period, and the killing had to be, quote, in the service of abnormal psychological gratification, so that it was more about something like sexual gratification, ego fulfillment, so forth. Now the definition permits us to include people who kill for criminal aims, gang activity, so forth. Now, regarding mass murder, one of the things I've said several times here on the show is that along with my colleague at Columbia Medical Center, Raghi Gurgis, I co-created the Columbia Mass Murder Database. That's, to our knowledge, the largest study ever done of mass murder worldwide. We looked at cases between 1900 and 2019. So it's an enormous data set, mass shootings and mass murders by any means. And first of all, when we talk about a mass murder, the more conservative definition is 4 people killed at the same time in the same location, no cooling off period. Some people, including ourselves, use the definition of 3 or more people killed at the same time in the same location, no cooling off period. Now, there are a lot of distinctions between mass murders that are personal cause, meaning individuals who, for some emotional or personal or psychological reason, go in and kill 3 or more or 4 or more people, depending upon your definition, and ones that are done in the interest of a gang. So, like, for example, when we look at trends in mass murder for personal reasons, the vast majority of them are not committed by people who are psychotic or severely mentally ill. And that is especially true when guns are used. You're significantly more likely to be severely mentally ill with psychotic symptoms if you use anything other than a firearm. But once a firearm is involved, you really don't think about psychosis as being the motive. That's a little bit of a myth. And the truth is that psychotic people are far more likely to be the victims of severe violence than to go out and perpetrate it. What you see in mass murder is more individuals who lack coping skills, who have very brittle, inadequate personality structures, and typically have achieved something in life that is taken from them. They lose a wife, a girlfriend, a job, a scholarship, school, or whatever, and they kind of snap. Because the entire personality is anchored in this one thing that kind of lends them structure. And that can be anything at all. And sometimes it's even a political belief or something like that. When we're looking at gang-related mass murder, it's a very different story, because you have individuals that in many ways see themselves as part of an army or a group that has a group cause, and they'll do pretty much anything in the name of that cause. Also, in personal cause mass murder, the average age is about 33. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but it's all over the map in gang killings, right? I mean, I've heard of mass murders by gang members that are basically kids, teenagers. So is that not correct, Greg, Jeff?
Can you say that again real quick?
No, I said in personal cause mass murder, the average age of the perpetrator was about 33. And in gang-related mass murder, it seems to be all over the map. I mean, you even have teenagers Absolutely. That will commit it. Correct. Right.
We have 15-year-olds in the unaccompanied minor program sneaking across the border who are already serial killers. They've killed at least 5 people if they're MS-13 gang members, and they're coming into our country. And then they have more. Those MS-13 gang members coming in from El Salvador have more reputation, more oomph when they get to their cities and start gangbanging here than American. Let me rephrase it. They have more oomph than MS-13 gang members who are jumped in and becoming homeboys in America. So you could have someone who's 30 years old, gets jumped in here in America, and he won't have the same kind of reputation that a 15-year-old coming across the border from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras.
Hey, I just want to pop in for one quick second since you mentioned El Salvador. First of all, shout out to Papa Bear, who's here watching from Moscow, Idaho, a place that's near and dear to our hearts. Hope you guys are healing. El Salvador, Jeff sent me some statistics. I looked up some of my own. MS-13 and the 18th Street gangs are rivals there. They were in a bloody war in 2015 in a country roughly the size of Massachusetts, which is where Jeff worked. They averaged 50 murders a day in September and 20 murders a day over that entire year in 2015. Luckily, I didn't know that because my wife's family is from El Salvador, and we visited back then with my youngest child. So I'm glad I did not know that until then. Meanwhile, this comment here from Megdell 22. Anne is amazing. Love seeing Jeff. Your show is fantastic. What about Gary? Hello to the great panel from Long Island, New York. So hello to everyone. We've got, I didn't know that, watching here from Ireland, and my favorite new name, I have to stop every time, Shaquille Oatmeal is in the house as well. Love that name. So this comment here from Don De Quisto. Sigfredo was a Latin king. The driver Luis was, but not so sure about Sigfredo. Sigfredo was not a Latin king. He was just a low-level criminal who Luis Rivera basically got to do his dirty work for him. And Jeff also told me.
Can I just interrupt real quick
100%.
there?
100%.
I would disagree with saying he was low level.
Okay.
He's a criminal. He's pulling the trigger, and he's at a minimum an associate of the Latin Kings. This may have been one of the tasks that was provided to him to become a Latin King. To one of the things you have to do to join a gang is to commit violent acts, including murder, sometimes murder. So here was something bringing him in. My guess, without getting to see all the paperwork the police have, he's at a minimum just an associate, because if I'm a Latin King, they're closed. They're not just going to grab some guy off the street to do something for them. They know him somehow. And so that's why I would say odds are this was a way to start bringing him into the gang, and this was his final test. It is a very good presumption guess on that part.
And by the way,
I just wanted to. Go ahead, Joel.
Just very, 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 very quickly. My beautiful mother, Carmela, was supposed to be here tonight. Dawn says, hi, Carm. When she heard that the great Ann Burgess was going to be here, and Gary and Jeff Wood, she said, there's no way I can compete. I relent. I give up. And so she yielded to the king and queens, or the queen and kings of true crime, and said she's going to hop on next week, but she is watching. So shout out to Carm. Gary, I'm sorry. Yeah, Gary, take the floor.
No, I know you were about to ask something to Ann. I just want to say something quickly, which is that we, in that list of differences between gang and personal cause mass murders, the two other things we need to clarify is also that only about 11.78% of mass murderers are actually serial killers, right? That will go on to kill again or have killed previously. But in the case of gang members, this is much more frequent. The mass murder is part of a pattern of probably being a serial killer. Because it's just part of the job, for these individuals. And the other thing is, Jeff, you used the phrase "pull the trigger." One of the things I hope we'll talk about is the weapons that are used in mass murders and in gang killings, because gang killings tend to be particularly brutal if there's a message being given to a rival gang or to the wider community, whereas often mass murder can be pretty expeditious with a firearm where there's no desire to do anything particularly sadistic and drawn out, just to kind of kill, widely with guns and things. So I'd be very interested to talk about that. But I'd love to hear the question you had for Ann. I didn't mean to jump
100%. And we're getting to that in just one quick second here. Debbie Blair writes, of course, the Adelsons were involved, and I feel so bad for Dan's kids as they don't have contact with their parental grandparents. We are in touch with Ruth Markel. The case hearing is coming right up. And we're going to find some stuff out about the trial. They've now asked for a continuance. The trial was set to start in April, but Charlie Adelson's defense team is asking to push it back. And then, I know you guys will like this comment. I am Angie Carson. I am reading A Killer by Design at the moment. But Ann, what I was going to ask you, and I'll have you unmute yourself. Jeff said that the FBI's BAU, which is the Behavioral Analysis Unit, doesn't spend a lot of time getting involved in gang-related serial killers, as they don't meet the idea of a serial killer per the FBI and I guess others investigate. Can you explain that and just your own, I don't know, interaction with gangs over your storied career?
Well, I can quickly enter while before Jeff is, you're absolutely correct. They do not, to my knowledge, get involved with them. And they didn't when I was down there, even getting into the profiling. And that's because there was a priority. There's a priority for the types of crimes that they investigate. And as I said, Jeff probably has that memorized where I don't, but it would be like bank robbers and hostage taking and things like that, but not gangs. So Jeff, can you explain why?
Jeff, real quick, before
Yes.
we get to your answer, which I want to hear, 5Car5, a friend of the show, writes, can you imagine a Latin King leader driving a Prius? Have you ever seen that before, Jeff? That was the case.
I've seen gangbangers drive all types of cars. So, okay. Yes. Again, gangs are smart. Gang members are smart. Not everyone is this, we just go off half-cocked shooting people. They plan things. I know they'll steal cars to do their drive-by shootings. So they'll do different things. And here's an example. We had a cell of Latin gangster disciples in Massachusetts. And they would go and rob high-end stores such as Best Buy and stuff. So they'd go up, and for a month and a half beforehand, they would drive up there, mess with the alarm system. So after a month of the police constantly were showing up to the Best Buy and not seeing anything, the night they're ready to go and do the robbery, they know that the police reaction will be slow because for the last month and a half, they've been having problems with the alarm system. So gang members aren't these guys and gals that we think about that are just psycho killers. They're very smart. And so yes, I could see them rent, if I believe correctly, if I remember reading some of the information, I believe they rented that Prius, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And that's how they were caught. One of the ways they were caught using their Sun Pass going through one of the tolls. But by the way, this is I'm glad that Sri Laura pointed this out. Sigfredo hired Luis Rivera, not the other way around. That is true. So I'm glad she corrected me there. But go ahead, Jeff.
So to answer the other question that we posed, the behavioral analysis unit, which everyone knows is our profilers, when you look back at Gary's definition, the initial definition of the serial killer, it was that odd behavior, the unnatural, something off. So when the BAU gets asked to help out with the case, that's what they're being asked to help out. So with gangs, they're not as interested because, it's a gang-related murder. We know some of the things going on. We already have a profile in a sense because we know it's a gang member. Before I retired, one of the things I was trying to do was to say, but how is this affecting the youth? Because as I said, we're having gang members as young as 11 being recruited. So you take El Salvadorian gang members at 11 years old, and they've killed at a minimum 5 people in El Salvador to become a homeboy. What's the toll on a young person who's killed at least 5? And 5 is a low number. I've interviewed people, and I can tell you right now, they sat across from me in the table. You can see in their eyes that these are killers, and you're talking dozens, like 2, 3, 20, 30, 40 people that they've killed, starting off at that young age. And so I had asked BAU to start like, hey, we may want to start looking at this, and priorities take place, and that's not a priority, unfortunately.
I think this is an interesting question. This is coming up because Luis Rivera was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Ann or Gary, I don't know if either of you can address this, but how early in age can we diagnose schizophrenia? One of you wants to take that.
Well, this is my area of expertise for many years. So this is a perfect question for me. First of all, most people who develop schizophrenia have what's called a prodromal phase. That's the portion of the illness that I concentrated on and helped contribute widely to the literature on what happens during that stage. That's a period that could last anywhere from months to about a year and a half, 2 years, some people even longer, that precedes full blown illness. And you start to see that in adolescence to young adulthood. We can see that pre phase even as early as something like 13, 14, 15. Most people start to show signs around 16, 17. Conversion to full illness tends to happen in the late teens, early 20s in males, and a little later in females, young adulthood to something like mid 20s. And you can also see the onset of serious psychotic symptoms, not necessarily schizophrenic, following birth in women. Sometimes it's of a schizophrenic nature, but it's usually more emotional psychotic illness that will happen postpartum. So that can happen at a later age. But generally, when you're talking about schizophrenia, you're talking about adolescence to early 20s.
And I want to jump in here. Hang on, I want to mute Gary real quick. Oh, there we go. And I think I've asked you this before, but every time I see you, you are smiling. I can just tell you're a very positive, optimistic person. You've made it a long way in life in every way, in age and in career and in status and all that. How do you do that, being that you study these gruesome things every day? I guess my bottom line question is, there are a lot of people out there who are fearful of just random violence, especially today with mass shootings seemingly every day, every other day. What do you say to people who see the world, through a true crime lens? Is the vast majority of society really just good people? You just happen to study a lot of the bad ones?
I'd agree with that. I do think that and I think research backs it up, that there's a certain group that just repeatedly does crime. But as I listen to Jeff and I listen to you and Gary, I'm wondering, or I guess my question to Jeff would be, with these rather awful crimes of multiple people that's going on now, in any way would these be trying to qualify to be in a gang, or are these just individual people, where they come in and they kill 3 or more with mass shooting? Do you think any are, if they've come in from a different country?
Well, that's a very good question. And I would say for gangs, it's to me, it's a different study. And there can be combinations of both. So when you're looking at 18th Street, MS-13 down in the Northern Triangle, which is our the 3 main countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, they've been fighting their rivals. And as my partner once said, a lot of gangs, they make their money and they traffic drugs. MS-13 traffics in violence. And so when you take these kids, 11, 12, they're, again, go back, look at some of the facts of the horrific facts that are going on. I was in El Salvador in April 2015, and they were averaging around 20 to 22 murders a day. When I went out with
Jeff, what were you doing down there? What was your role down there?
So I was conducting a what we call in the FBI a long-term criminal enterprise investigation. So basically, we're doing a gang investigation, and we were targeting MS-13. And one of my subjects, a leader in Boston, flew down to El Salvador, and we have FBI agents who are assigned to El Salvador working with local police. It's called the Transnational Anti-Gang Unit. So I called down and I said, hey, my guy's coming down. Can you follow him? So they followed him, and they said he went back into MS-13 territory where they couldn't really go much further because of the danger. But it was what we determined during this investigation, that MS-13 was so part of the reason for all the violence, all the war that was going on, is they wanted to become a new drug cartel themselves. They wanted to get into the drug business. So my partners from El Salvador said, come down, we're going to teach you about some of the changes that we've seen. So when you go back to MS-13, they were formed in 1979 in LA. El Salvadorian immigrants that were fleeing the Civil War. They come to LA. There's a lot of different gangs going on in LA. So you had a bunch of these El Salvadorian immigrants who were pot smokers, loved heavy music, heavy rock and roll, and they came together. And then over the next few years, they morphed into what we would consider a typical street gang in LA. Once you get into the prison systems, though, they start breaking the law. They're in the prison systems in California. And one thing I noticed in California, that the gangs predominantly, not all the time, but there's a lot of gangs where they follow the race. So you have your white gangs, your black gangs, your Asian gangs, and your Hispanic gangs. And in the California prison systems, the Mexican mafia ruled the Hispanic gangs. So you had MS-13, 18th Street, and they all had to throw allegiance back to the Mexican mafia. So MS-13 was Mar Salvatrucha. They added the number 13 to make MS-13 to show their allegiance to the Mexican mafia. This was what we consider still an American type of gang. But now we started deporting these felons for breaking the law, not being naturalized citizens yet. So they were deported back to El Salvador. And once they got back to El Salvador in the 90s, they morphed into an El Salvadorian gang where their violence, what they committed, their crimes was much more horrific than what we've seen in the United States. And from the late 2000s or mid 2000s, the gang leadership decided they needed to do some things, because not only were you seeing MS versus the police, MS versus 18th Street, you started seeing MS fighting amongst themselves, and they wanted to control that infighting because you have all these different cliques, and so the cliques would fight. So basically the gang, the leadership said, we're going to be MS, we're going to have different programs, and cliques are going to fall under each program. So when you go down into El Salvador, literally you can drive down a street, and on one side of the street is one clique of MS-13, on the other side is another clique of MS-13, and they would fight because they would actually they run their neighborhood. So everything in that neighborhood is extorted. Every bodega, the taxis that come in, any buses or any delivery trucks, they're all extorted. So you'd have me as in one bodega, I get extorted. Then the next day, the other clique would come over and try and extort me. And now we're having fighting because I'd be like, I can't continue my business. I'm paying everyone. So when that would happen, by making these programs, the clique leaders would report up to their program managers, who would talk to one another and say, okay, hey, that's that clique's territory. This is your clique's territory. And they'd have to get permission if there was a beef. I couldn't, from my clique, go kill another clique member unless everyone at the program level said, okay, they violated a law, you can kill them now. And then that hit would be sanctioned. So they brought us down for that training. But I can tell you, it was unique because the police officers that we have working with us would drive 2+ hours to come to work because they would live so far away, so they wouldn't be recognized. And when we go on the streets, they would be all masked up because MS-13 would target them and kill them. So I mean, it's one of those places where it is the Wild West down there. And when we went out, they picked us up at the airport, and we're like a presidential security detail. There's cops in front, cops behind, all armed up, driving us to get us to where we have to go because how dangerous it was. And after 20 years of working gangs, I can say this: MS-13 was the most violent gang I've ever investigated.
So, Jeff, to you, Mary writes, I'm terrified of them, meaning gangs. Should an average person be terrified of gangs? I mean, they kind of operate everywhere. I mean, they're sort of like sharks. You go in the ocean and they're right around you. You don't realize it. Is there reason to be fearful?
I have went to different businesses and talked about gangs. It's one of the things I do. And I typically I would say no. You don't need to be necessarily fearful of the gangs coming after you, but I try and teach, I went to an electric company and I was trying to teach them of signs to be on the lookout. Because one thing I've noticed, I have been trained to shoot out of a moving car when I was with the State Department. So if we're in a country and the car came under ambush, if we had to shoot our way out in the military, I suck at it. Here are gang members who haven't been even trained and they go out and do drive-by shootings. People rarely hit their intended target. They hit the innocent kid walking home from school. So I try to teach people like, hey, here are things that you need to be on the lookout for when you go into different neighborhoods in the cities. So that way you don't become a victim through a drive-by or something, or do something that can be disrespectful to a gang, right? I would be out in the street at times. I'd see a bunch of gang kids. We knew they were gang kids. And I'd get them riled up. For the Latin Kings, they'd throw up their gang signs, their crown. So I would drive by and I'd throw the crown sign down and just stick my hand out. And you could see the Latin Kings all start getting blood, like ready to go fight. And then my partner, I'd jump out of the car and all of a sudden it'd be like, hey, what's going on? How you doing? And I'm like, they'd be like, hey, what's going on? I said, so you still running with the Latin Kings? No. Why'd you get so mad when I disrespected the Latin King sign, right? And we just have a little chat and laugh and stuff. But these were things, if I can't remember where it was, but somebody was dancing and they were doing something and they ended up throwing this sign. I don't know if you can see it well, but they're making a crown and they were just dancing. They didn't know what it meant, but there was a Latin King nearby, saw it and was disrespected and shot that person over something as simple as that. So that's what people need to be more fearful of with gangs in that sense.
Let me jump in here. We've got Anita Reyes, Dr. Ann and Gary are my favorite, and Jeff, and they're my favorite as well. There's some interesting kind of tangential points that tie in, and we're going to get to why the Boston Marathon or how the Boston Marathon bombing was impacted by gangs as well. But I know Gary wanted to mention Michigan State. Just for those of you who don't know much of the details, a gunman killed 3 Michigan State University students, critically wounding 5 others. Turned out he had a list of other targets, 2 handguns, and a lot of ammunition when police found him. He ended up taking his own life. He was a 43-year-old African-American man named Anthony Dwayne McRae. Gary, what is the significance of this in terms of how it complements or contrasts to gang shooting?
Well, I think the reason it would be worthwhile to mention is only that it's such an excellent example of a personal cause mass shooting event, which can be contrasted nicely with what we see in a gang mass murder. For all the reasons we said earlier, we had a lone individual who, as I said, the classic story is having something in your life that is taken from you. Whenever I hear about a mass shooting, I always say, let's wait to see what the person lost. In the case of this individual, it was his mother who had died, and he had an extremely difficult time adjusting to that emotionally. So what we saw there was an emotionally driven, brittle individual, lacking coping skills, kind of bitter, envious, angry. I don't think it was a coincidence. It was the eve of Valentine's Day, which is a day associated with company and love and affection. I never thought it was a coincidence, for instance, that Nicholas Cruz attacked at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas on Valentine's Day for the same reason. Although that's never talked about, that it was Valentine's Day. I don't think it's a coincidence. And also, no financial gain whatsoever. And also important is that in personal cause mass murder, about half of the time, particularly when firearms are used, suicide is the ultimate purpose for the individual. The act is an expression of something emotional, and then they're sated when it's done. In gang murder, this kind of killing is just a kind of part of a process where they'll go on and repeatedly do this. And also note the expeditious use of a gun. Jeff, one of the things I hope we'll get into is the symbolism and the kind of exaggerated brutality of some gang murder because of the idea of giving a message communicating something to the wider community. Because when people like us look at a crime scene, sometimes we have to guess if this is gang activity or personal cause, and it can be useful to know if there are distinctions like that have to do with or there'll be signs of multiple perpetrators, which is far less common in a mass murder for personal gain. So the other thing I hope we'll touch on is the psychology of who gets into these gangs, who leads them, and what kind of a person falls prey to a gang. I have some things to say about that. I'm sure Ann and Jeff, you do too. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, but seems like a good time to kind of get into it a little.
Jeff, hang on one sec. I want to bounce into that for sure, but I want to get Ann into the conversation. And Jay Thomas Reset has this question for her. Jay is a friend of the show, very knowledgeable. Koberger-like eyebrows, I joke with him. Real quick, ask Ann, do they still use handwriting analysis in profiling? When I mention handwriting to the quote-unquote new breed, they look at me like I've got 3 heads. So, Ann, are they still analyzing handwriting?
Well, I certainly say that if they have something, and we won't get into it today, but we're looking at manifestos being analyzed, not necessarily for their handwriting, but certainly for their content. I will say that a lot of new students, and even in my own classes, they haven't been taught handwriting. As a matter of fact, they do printing. So whether they're going to get into being able to analyze printing, I don't know. Most students will type and turn in things that way. There's so much use of the laptop on the internet. So I think handwriting, and I teach it. I certainly teach it because I think it's very, very important. And some of the examples, especially when there's forgery involved, I think that's the one crime where it can be utilized in. But to answer his question is, I wish we were, and they do have handwriting analysts down at Quantico, and they have come in on cases if they have something like bank notes and some of the kidnapping. Certainly the one out of, I'm blocking on the one, but the little boy that, of the air pilot. But Jeff, do you have anything more to say on handwriting?
I never used handwriting other than, is this handwriting the same so I could say this person wrote this? So I didn't have handwriting in that sense, just because for us, when my first 2 years, I was doing violent crimes where it was bank robberies and armored car robberies, kidnappings, and then I got into gangs. And so if we had a bank robbery note, I would say, okay, once we had someone as a suspect, we'd get their handwriting and have it compared to the note to say, oh, that's the same person. So unfortunately, when it comes to a handwriting analysis to tie into a serial killer, I don't have any information on.
And then, Ann, I wanted to jump right back in with Anita's comment here. Joel asked him about the phrase family annihilator. This is coming up now with the Alec Murdaugh trial. I had never heard of the phrase, and I had Phil Waters on, who's a very seasoned detective who was unfamiliar with it as well. He's investigated over 400 homicides. But who is a family annihilator, and what are the traits, the characteristics that most of them have?
Do you want me to answer that? That's a mass murder term.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in there.
Gary, why don't you take that, Gary?
Yeah, family annihilator is a subtype of mass murder, usually mass murder, depending how many family members there are. But what it usually means is that an individual has decided to wipe out his own, and I say his because it's almost always male, but there are female cases, decided to wipe out the entire family, usually followed by suicide. The interesting thing is that those offenders will even generally kill the pets. What happens is that the individual, either because of some intoxication or depression or paranoia or a sense of infidelity or financial concern, decides to kill the children and the partner and then the self. It's a very interesting thing because if you look at the literature on it, this is a phenomenon that actually happens in the animal world. For example, if a male lion smells on the female lion the scent of another lion, he'll kill the pride. He'll kill the female and the cubs. And we see that also in some breeds of horse. If they've impregnated the female horse and there's a smell of another horse on that horse, they will intentionally force abortion of the fowl, so that you wind up with this kind of interesting phenomenon where it has something to do with something has messed with the purity of this line, and I'm going to annihilate this entire line. But you can also see it for all kinds of other reasons, psychiatric, drug, alcohol related, but it's usually related to some kind of desperation. And the males, when you look at the average age, they tend to be middle-aged, for some reason, kind of high-functioning guys. But my sense has always been that that's because there has to be some fall from some previously obtained status that you've now lost, right? You're successful and now it's over, right? Someone just cheated, left you, there's a narcissistic injury, financial loss. So again, as with all mass murder, you always ask the question, what did this person lose? That was the cement and the glue for them. But I think that's a really great question, because family annihilation is a very understudied thing, and it is unfortunately usually lumped in with other mass murder in study, and I think muddies the waters because it's a kind of apples and oranges comparison, and really shouldn't be thrown. I think those are a separate breed of mass murderer. So
Gary,
fascinating. Usually, yeah, go ahead.
I grew up
So,
very close to
yeah.
Westfield, New Jersey, and it was always a very scary story about John List, who murdered his whole family. I think the term was developed around then. Do you happen to know the history? Is that roughly when it was developed, that term?
To be honest with you, the first time I heard that term is when it was used by the academic David Wilson. I'm not sure where he might have gotten it from, or if it goes back to List, but List is certainly an example of a family annihilator. There's no question he embodied the term, and I think showed a lot of kind of psychopathic scheming and a lot of other things that you don't generally see in a family annihilator. Family annihilator is usually not a psychopath, but a brittle, emotionally kind of unsteady person who's been wounded, and usually follows the family annihilation by killing the self. But in the case you're talking about, the individual was on the lam for a very long time and had to be identified with people who sort of made a guess at what he would have looked like based on his age. And I think it was on like America's Most Wanted or something. It was identified. So he's kind of a special case. I wouldn't want to lump him in with the average family annihilator.
This next comment stood out to me from Jody Johnston. Your guests are so smart and passionate about their fields. I was just lecturing my 8-year-old daughter today to do what you love to do. So it's not a job. She looked at me like I was insane and just wanted to talk about the party she was at. I understand that. And then Jody says, now so am I, and wish I could start my life and career over. It is never too late. But Anne, putting things into context, there were not, if any women doing what you're doing when you started doing what you're doing. How did you get interested in all this? And at the time, did people think you were nuts for studying this? Because it had to be very out of the ordinary.
Well, they told me it wouldn't help my career, that I should get out of it. And they didn't understand nurses doing this. Nurses take care of people with physical, disease or disorders or whatever, not this head stuff. So anyway, how did I get into it? I got invited, as I said, down to Quantico, and then was fascinated with the research they were doing on offenders. And I always like to put the two halves together. You got the victims on one side, and then what is it that has victimized them? And you have to go to the offender. And that's why we spent so much time trying to classify offenders, so that I could, when I worked with victims, I could tell them what they had been a victim of. Like you get pneumonia, do you want to know if it's bacterial or viral? Because it'll make a difference in how you get treated. So I would say that is how I got into it. And luckily, it was not much was known about it. So much of what we were able to write, we didn't have a lot to review. We did a lot of literature to review.
Just wanted to get a couple more comments in here. This is from Papa Bear, who's in Moscow, Idaho. Thanks, Joel. All of us in and near Moscow are slowly healing and grateful for all the support near and far. Hopefully more healing with the trial actually occurring. Again, we are thinking of all of you. To this comment, in light of our El Salvador conversation, El Salvador has the highest murder rate per capita in the world. That is not a surprise. And then, Jeff, let's get back to you and this comment here and who joins gangs. I'm just looking for some of my information, which I know I have here on this. This wasn't, Mary writes, didn't a gang kill a family of 6 in Texas? It was actually California. And just so people know the context, and then I'll let Jeff take over here. 2 gang members were arrested. I believe it was earlier this month after a gun battle. I'm sorry, it was in January. 6 people were massacred, including a baby, at a Central California home. This was all associated or happened because of a rival gang. Sheriff Mike Bordeaux said that Noah David Beard, 25, was taken into custody, and Angel Nanu Uriarte, 35, was wounded in a shootout with federal agents. That could have, God forbid, been a guy like Jeff. He was undergoing surgery but was in stable condition. The suspects and members of the victim's family, so both the shooters and the people who got shot, had a long history of gang violence, but the motive for the shooting was still not exactly clear at this time. But Jeff, I know Gary was interested in talking about, the psychology, how old are people who join, those sorts of things. But here they didn't hesitate. They literally shot a teen mom and a baby, an infant, which is just sickening. But they do this in a very callous and heartless way, correct?
Absolutely. One thing I've seen changing over the years, I'm a big supporter of community policing. I think one of the things that we need to get back to in this country, I used to travel the country teaching at anti-gang conferences, and the conference would be split into 2. You'd have the law enforcement angle and how to conduct investigations, how to target gangs, but we also had the social aspect where we talked about trying to prevent kids from joining gangs, keep kids from going back to gangs after actually starting to get into gangs, doing some jail time. And one of my friends who taught was in fact a gang member, and he left the gang after a rival gang killed his little infant brother. And so that shocked him. And I know where he was, he would sit down with the police and he would do things where he'd bring troubled youth into the police departments, and the chief would bring police officers. And it wasn't the police, they would meet at a school gymnasium, and you'd have the room and the cops would be on one side, the kids would be on the side. And then the chief and and my buddy would get everyone to start talking. And by the end, you'd break down so many different barriers. And so when I first started working gangs and was dealing typically with most American known gangs, the Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, Bloods, Crips, Hells Angels, but with the other the Kings and Gangster Disciples, we'd be out on the road and we'd interact with them all the time. We talk with them, we do things just so they could see us and we could see them, and develop some kind of rapport. However, now when you start looking at MS-13, 18th Street, some of these Mexican gangs that are coming into the country, they have a totally different mentality. And I phrase it almost as a third world type mentality, in the sense that you have these young men and women who have been exposed to violence to such a degree that our youth have not been exposed to, where on a daily basis they're seeing dead bodies in the road, dead bodies everywhere. Here, our violence is definitely increasing, but it's still not to the same extent. So, when you look at the average profile of a gang member, and this is for all the gangs, whether they're American or Central American, they're both male and female. They're any race. Gang members don't care if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian. In some places, we dealt with it in Massachusetts. You'd have Latin Kings where you had white Latin Kings. We'd have Bloods that were Asian and white as well as black. You'd have Hispanic, and you'd have gangs where they were multicultural. You go to other parts of the country and they're still very based on the race of that group. So if you're in LA and you're a blood, it's going to be predominantly black. I won't say you wouldn't find a different race, but they're going to be more along the racial lines in LA for bloods. It can change. We've seen things changing, so I won't say it's always like that. So another thing that we see with gang members, they start young, around 11 years old. They're being recruited. Up to 25 to 30. You typically don't see very old gang members unless they're OGs and they're coming out of jail. Most of our gang members are young, so I typically call them kids, even though they're not always kids. A lot of times they come from single-parent households. I remember it was either right before I deployed to Afghanistan with the FBI or right after I came back. I was in Detroit teaching at one of these gang conferences, and I was talking to a captain out of Detroit, and he told me that you had the average age of a gang mother was 13 years old. So we're no longer dealing with, I'm just joining the gang. I'm dealing with the fact that by the time she's 39, she's a great grandmother, and every kid is, it's a multi-generational thing. I locked up a kid at 18 years old, a Latin King, who was a second in command for this chapter out of one of our cities in Boston. But I was investigating him when he was 17, when we first launched this case. And he was actually saying at 17, when he got the promotion, I've been working on this since I was 12 years old because my family, my uncles, my cousins, my his family members are gang members. So it's not back in the day where it's a first generational. It's a multi-generational thing. I locked up one gang member. He was 25 years old. He had a 1-year-old baby. And on the federal crime that I had him on, he was looking at 25 to 30 years in prison. And I was trying to get him to help me solve a murder. And I said, look, you work with us here. This could go a long way to helping reduce your sentence. And his response to me was like, I'm not going to help. And I said, well, you won't see your son again. It's not in the federal system. There's only one federal prison in Massachusetts, and it's a medical prison. So this kid is going to be sent away. He's not going to see his kid for 20, 25 years. And I told him that. And his response was, I don't give a fuck. He'll be running the streets the way I do now. So, we can't look at gang members, and too many people do this. We're law-abiding citizens. We look at the law. We follow the law. And we can't comprehend unless you live it, or do it, where to the gang members, we look at, we want our children to go and be better and have great things. We want to set them up for success. The gang kids too want to set their kids up for success to be gang members. So, you'll see them and they'll take their guns and they'll put the guns in the baby diaper. You'll have a little baby in the diaper in the crib, and they'll take a photo, and there you can see the gun butt sticking out of their diaper, because that's their mentality, to be a gang member, to continue this on. So when you go into these environments, they're coming from single parent households, they're streetwise for their age, they're involved in the criminal justice system young, they're aggressive, they have negative role models. I have yet to hit a house when I was an agent on a search warrant where I didn't see, a poster from Scarface or some other movie where we're depicting the gang member, the criminal, as the hero of the movie. And so when you go back and you look at why do kids join gangs? Well, they join gangs for a lot of reasons. Not everyone comes from, a lot of people always say, oh, Chicago or the city. No, one of the most violent gang members I locked up as an individual gang member was a kid from Marblehead, Massachusetts, which is an extremely affluent city outside of Boston. And this kid had an $800,000 trust fund that he had. And so here he is. He's doing drive-by shootings at 40 miles an hour down the streets of Lynn, Massachusetts, committing these crimes at the time kids are coming out of school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's many different reasons. There's peer pressure. They grow up in a gang neighborhood, and they need to seek protection from a rival gang. You have the older gangsters who come in and say, hey, you join my gang, we're going to be your family. We're going to take care of you. Look at all the money I have. Look at the cool car. Look at the cool chains I have. Everything's about right now. One of my sources I had, who I ended up locking up because he couldn't stay out of the criminal world. I locked him up. I said, look, I told you, if you needed something, come to me. He goes, Jeff, you don't understand how hard it was. I used to make $5,000 every couple of days slinging heroin. Now I'm making $800 a day, $800 a week if I'm lucky at Market Basket. It's the instant gratification that they no longer, that these kids are seeking. And for all gangs, there's this blood in, blood out mentality of, I have to commit crimes. I have to commit a violent crime to become a gang member. Then once they're being brought into the gang, you've got a beat-in. So MS-13, you're beat in for 13 seconds. Other gangs, it's a different time frame. During your life in the gang, if you break a rule, they punish you. And so for the Latin Kings, we have it on tape where they would meet, they call it a cipher, and the Latin Kings would come together. And let's say I go, hey, and you're the leader, Joel, and you go, does anyone have a beef? Has anyone violated problems? I go, yes, Gary just violated this rule. And I present my evidence. Gary gets to defend himself. And then you and the rest of the leaders would go, yeah, Gary violated the rule. And Gary would have to put his hands above his head. And then the minister of defense would go to town and start punching Gary in the ribs and stuff for 13 seconds or 20 seconds as his punishment. And as he was doing this, he'd have to say, Amor de Rey, love to the kings, right? MS-13 does the same thing. And I will say this, when it comes to MS-13, the difference is they've raised it to where you have to kill 5 people to join the gang or to become a homeboy. And they like it where every gang loves their guns. They all have their guns, but MS-13, you have to get wet. And they love their knives. So you have to stab the person to death. So you get their blood on you, which takes it to a whole nother level. Because unless you've been there, when that hot, sticky blood comes out of the body and hits you, that's a totally different thing than if I'm standing far enough away and I pull the trigger. Because, if I get close, yes, I could get some blood on, but further away, you're not going to get that blood spatter on you, but you are with a knife. And with MS-13, it's not like I stab you once. They're hacking and slashing you. 40-some plus stab wounds where they're trying to take off your head so they can roll it down the street to send to the community. This is MS-13 territory. 18th Street isn't coming in. And it's so violent. And now we're seeing too with MS-13, for example, not only do they stab you at the end, because sometimes they left. I remember one time in our case, they left someone where his intestines are coming out. He's been disemboweled, but he survived because the paramedics from all the training, and it's not training, it's actual battlefield medicine that they're doing to keep soldiers alive, are now coming back and becoming paramedics here, and they're keeping these young kids alive. And so now they're saying, okay, we'll you slice and dice, and then at the end we'll pull the trigger. So
you can tell no one knows more, is probably as passionate as Jeff Wood about gangs and gang violence. It is a crazy world. Want to get to a couple more comments here. Morgiana, love you guys. Newest subscriber. Thanks for hopping on, Morgiana, STS Nation. I'm learning a lot from you guys. That's why I love hosting the show. I learn from all these people. I love this comment. Love this panel from Susan Wood. And is a testament to the fact that age is not a barrier to intellectual heft. What an inspiring example for senior women. Anne is young in my book, that's for sure. And then we've got this comment here. Late to the stream, but so glad to see Dr. Ann and Gary back again, 2 of the smartest in the field. I just read The New Evil last month. Gary is checking his mail right now to look for that check. Should be required reading for all desk chair detectives. And to you, obviously you've been involved in this line of work for many years. How is it changing? I mean, Jeff talked about this instant gratification, gang members not wanting to earn money, as E.F. Hutton said, the old-fashioned way. They want to earn it instantly. So how is crime changing with the the ever-evolving world of technology and just the modern age?
Well, I think one is certainly the mass shootings. I think that we're seeing more. Look at you don't go a couple of weeks without having some case, and they're not publicizing them probably as much nationally, but they are certainly in their own states. I think that's a big change. And I think the other, I wanted to comment on that California case, whether Jeff had any other thoughts that the 17-year-old girl, however old she was, and her 10-month-old baby, who was the father of that child, whether that she was targeted because of a gang. It certainly sounded like a gang, that so many people were killed in the family. So I just wondered if it was one family against another, or why was the baby, it sounded like she might have known who it was because she tried to jump over a fence or something and then was killed. So maybe Jeff, can you fill in the details?
Well, all I have is what I've read as well. And my guess would be, as a gang investigator, that there was a situation here where either she had dated a gang member, someone in the house was affiliated with either that gang or a rival gang, and something caused an incident that pissed the gang off. And as a result, they went in there to kill everyone, and they don't care. Perfect example, summer of 2016, we had a young El Salvadoran immigrant. She had been dating a leader of MS-13 who we locked up, sentenced to jail for life in prison for the 2 homicides he was responsible for. And she broke up with him. Ended up starting to date an 18th Street gang member because in that whole East Boston, Chelsea, Revere area, Everett of Massachusetts has one of the largest Central American populations in the country. So you have a lot of MS-13, a lot of 18th Street there. And MS-13 was so enraged that she started dating outside of the gang that they took her and they killed her. And when I say they killed her, they stabbed her. You could put a golf ball on the size of some of the knife wounds in her neck. And then she was a very beautiful young girl. They took a fire extinguisher, and here was a signal to them: we're taking away your beauty, because they smashed her face in with the fire extinguisher. So here in California, whoever it was either rival, they owed a drug debt to the gang, they weren't doing something that they were supposed to do in the gang world, and the team went out to take care of them and to send the message that, okay, either she left the gang or left the boyfriend, somebody in the house did something, and this was retribution. That's how I see it. And one thing I've known over the years is when it comes to gang-related shootings, gang-related homicides, that our homicide investigative units need to work with the gang units, because the gang units will have a lot of intelligence that they can provide to those to the homicide investigations. In my case, I know the task force I was a part of, we solved a lot of homicides because we arrested gang members who didn't want to do 20 years in jail, and then they start cooperating, or we have the right people at the right time who are wearing wires, and we'll show some videos down the road here where the people who committed the crimes actually admit to doing it. So that way we have their confession on tape that we can play at a trial. So that's what I see with that that California case.
Real quickly, I just want to remind everyone, Carm deferred to the All-Star panel tonight, and we'll hop back in. Actually, next Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're following an amazingly interesting case of Ellen Greenberg. She was a school teacher outside a Philadelphia suburb in a town called Manayunk. She was stabbed 20 times, 10 of those to the back, and 2 of the injuries, at least 2 of them, after she was already dead, and it was ruled a suicide. And next weekend, we have her parents on. Josh and Sandy Greenberg are coming on next Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, live. Carmela will be here to help me break that down. What you can do for Carm tonight, and me a little bit. Hit that like button. It gets the algorithm moving. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Meg writes, love Dr. Gary also. Brilliant. As I stated, great panel and show, but missing Carmen tonight. She always makes me smile. And Gary, I'm hoping you can address this. And something Jeff said immediately made me think of Gary Bricado, which I'll tell you in a second. Seljack writes, so many mass shootings involve perps on psych drugs or recently going off of them. I wish there was unbiased, no big pharma involved research. Wondering if you can address that, Gary, but also Jeff talked about how these, I think it was the Latin Kings, you have to stab somebody and feel the warmth of that human blood on them. Is that also something that serial killers, for lack of a better phrase, kind of get off on? Is that a mutual trait?
I'm not sure who you want to answer, Joel.
I'll just real quick say that they like to get very up close and personal. They like to actually strangulate. Strangulation is often one of the more commonly used, and that's actually touching the person. Not that stabbing isn't, but go ahead, Gary. You wanted to jump in.
Well, first of all, I think, listening to Jeff talking about the personality configurations of people in gangs, one thinks of the work of Keckley, and who talked about primary and secondary psychopathy, right? So primary psychopaths being people who are true blue, probably at least partially hereditary, born that way psychopaths. And then there are secondary psychopaths who are people who, for whatever reason, do things that make them look rather psychopathic for external reasons, like participating in a gang because of some need that they have, or emotional kind of vulnerability that draws them in. And then they sort of become very difficult to distinguish. What I find so fascinating is that when we think about personal cause killers, psychopaths, things like that, we think about people who simply lack a moral compass, lack a code. But what Jeff is describing that is so fascinating is that there is a moral code in the gang. It's just a different one. It's sort of like saying you must obey this moral code or you'll be punished. The same way you might think about the moral code in the average individual that comes from religion or culture or society or whatever. It sounds like the whole point is to prove that you now have allegiance only to the moral code of this group. And as a consequence, you have to do some awful, horrendous thing to prove it, just like you would do joining a fraternity or some other kind of thing where you've got to do something over the top to prove your allegiance. And I think that's where you're getting you've got to be soaked in blood. The whole point being it would be horrifying to you at first, but you're going to prove that you're going to overcome that out of loyalty. I think that's what makes it different than a serial killer that can't wait to dive in there and do it because it's for personal enjoyment. And the thing I was hoping Jeff would talk about, because I've heard whispers of it from even patients I've had that have had gang involvement, are some of these awful initiation rites that are necessary to prove that a person has loyalty only to the gang. You've got to find a good Samaritan, and do some horrible things to them, beat them with a bat or something like that to prove that you have no guilt anymore, that you'll do whatever it is we want. So it's almost like making someone into a psychopath. Now, Jeff, I would imagine that there probably are some authentic psychopaths in gangs, and then probably a whole mixed bag of people with all kinds of emotional problems, lost souls, all kinds of other people that have other needs that make them join, or cultural reasons for joining. But I wonder what you know about that subject, because I'm not aware of major studies of that. And then I think, if we have a chance, I can address the question that came up about the big pharma. But I think, it would be fascinating to hear your thoughts on those points.
And right before Jeff hops in, I just want Jeff to also address this. I think it's important. Roxanne says Latin Kings had nothing to do with Dan Markel's death. Sigfredo Garcia was not a Latin King, which we already said. Luis Rivera had no beef with Dan. Magbanua hired Garcia. Rivera drove. Hit was done for the Adelsons. Jeff, what is your response to that? Because he is a Latin King gang member. I don't know if he currently is, but he certainly was when he helped commit this crime. So how would you respond to Roxanne when she says that the Latin Kings had nothing to do with his death?
We touched on this earlier, and again, I will say, yes, the Latin Kings didn't go after him, but gangs will do anything to make money. So, to answer this question, let me talk about one of the first gangs that I ever helped out on an investigation. It was the Latin Gangster Disciples, the LGDs, and you'd have a crew that was so you'd have this big gang. This group here sold crack. This group here sold heroin. This group did robberies. This group did this, right? So if a gang can find a way to make money, they'll do it. The Latin King here was asked to kill somebody, and we call that in law enforcement as a murder for hire. I've investigated murders for hire. Who do you go to commit murders? People who are criminals. So if I remember correctly from what I'm reading, somehow or another, this one woman had some kind of relationship to Garcia and asked him and said, "Hey, we're going to pay you." She's been convicted, if I remember correctly.
She was his baby mama, Katie Magbanawa,
right?
His baby mama, and she was also at one point dating the ex-brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson, who's about to go on trial. So she was the intermediary and brought Sigfredo into it, who brought Luis Rivera into it.
But she knew a Latin King. She knew a criminal, right? So I saw a comment earlier tonight where someone said, "How do we get undercovers?" I very rarely used undercovers in my gang. People ask me all the time, "Jeff, did you go undercover?" I screen cop. Who's going to believe me as a gangbanger, drug dealer? No one. To infiltrate the gang, to get the most that you need to be able to make arrests, to disrupt and dismantle that gang, you need someone inside. And so there's many different ways we do it, but we would pick a couple people, and develop them as sources, so that way we'd have someone inside the gang. Why? Because if I'm a Latin King and you're a Latin King, you're going to believe me. And so if I come to you and say, "Hey, I need an ounce of crack," you're going to sell it to me so I can go sell it to someone else, right? If you don't know me from a hole in the wall, are you going to sell me an ounce of crack cocaine? No. So here's a case. She knew a Latin King. So yes, the Latin Kings as a whole didn't have a beef with this kid. But she knew a Latin King, and she said, "Hey, for money, can we get this person killed?" Because I know she's been found guilty. The brother-in-law has not yet. Well, was it the brother-in-law or the brother?
It's a brother-in-law.
Okay, but
no. I'm sorry. It's the brother. It's the victim's ex-brother-in-law.
Yes.
So
that's where I'm saying it's still, in a sense, to me, as a gang investigator, it's still a gang-related shooting. Whether or not he pulled the trigger or not, he facilitated it, and he used an associate who pulled the trigger. He drove there. They did surveillance to be able to go and commit this murder. So it's gang-related in the sense a gang was involved, but it wasn't the whole gang, and it wasn't a gang-on-gang thing. It was, I got hired to commit a murder. And we see that a lot in the gang world.
And I want to get to a couple of these videos because we've been going a while here. I want to make sure we get them in. But this question I think is interesting from Gen B. Is it true? Because this would obviously affect a larger group than just the gang members. Is it true, Jeff, that gangs tag people's homes for invasion? Is that true?
No. When you see tagging, you're in a gang area and gangs are marking the territory. If there's a home invasion, the majority of times of home invasions are going to be, I've got drugs in the house, I got a lot of money from drugs in the house, or I have guns in the house. Gang members, drug cartels, they want, if I can go and steal $40,000 worth of cocaine to sell without ever having to pay it, and then step on it to make my money back and be able to buy more and make a profit, it's a lot easier to steal it. So home invasions today are, hey, we know this is a drug stash house, so we're hitting the house to steal the drugs. It may not be the stash house, but this is where he keeps all his money, so we hit the house to steal the money. We had a case where a guy was a gun collector. They hit the house because they want all the guns out of the house. So home invasions are being happened because they're targeting it for a specific reason to further the criminal enterprise of the gang.
Hey, Jeff, one question that's very, very topical, and I'm not going to talk to Ann or Gary about this. We discussed it, but to you, Alec Murdaugh, who's on trial right now, we're coming up on closing arguments in this case. It was revealed that he was spending $50,000 a week on opioids. He also happens to have an airstrip on his property, a plane and a hangar. And there are a lot of people insinuating that this could have been a cartel hit, or he was involved in the drug trade. Just from what you know and what I told you, does that sound like a possibility? Because everyone I've talked to said it's absolutely impossible for any human being to have that kind of a habit where they're spending $50,000 on a week on a personal habit involving OxyContin, otherwise known as hillbilly heroin. Could there be something bigger and more sinister at play?
I mean, there could be. There always could. There always could be. I just, to me, this is tough.
We don't have to.
I don't like to rule out anything. When I did my investigations, I would have a board up, and I would try and plan my case out. I try to, if we had a murder, if we had something, I didn't want to rule things out because I may have my suspicion, and that's where I think the case should go. But if I focus solely on that to the exclusion of everything else, and if I couldn't keep an open mind to say, I'm not proving it here, and I go out of my way, then do I develop evidence to prove my case that's not existent, right? So to say yes, I would say, to me, $50,000 a week for opioids, I think that's a little high. Do I think a cartel would come in? If I've pissed off the cartel to that point, they're not just going to kill the family. They're going to kill him too. If he's done something wrong, it's not just mother, son. It's everyone. It would be what we saw in California. It would be what we saw, what we see in Mexico. But again,
and that's the point that everyone has made when it's brought up, is that if that was the case, Alec Murdaugh would probably not be here himself. But and in a very broad sense here, we've got Alec Murdaugh's father, who just passed away, is joining the chat. Solicitor Randolph. Alec Murdaugh is not a family annihilator. Buster, his son, is still alive. Can you, or maybe this is a Gary question, without getting into the specific case, do you have to literally kill everyone in the family to be a family annihilator? Or, Gary, can you leave one out and still be considered a family annihilator?
The term generally applies when somebody has, in fact, annihilated the entire family. But it raises an interesting question. If somebody intended to be, should they? Because I suppose they would be an attempted family annihilator. But the whole point of the process is to really leave, absolutely no one, including the pets, usually, as I had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I just say that if anyone survived, they usually had been shot or whatever, and they just luckily survived. But the intent, I think the issue is the intent would be to take everyone out. And we've done some cases like that where the whole family has been taken out.
And that makes sense. Jeff, I'm going to try to play this video. Let's see if we can actually do this here.
Ahí téngalo. Ya te volaba el dedo este mes. Así te iba a dar para atrás. Loco, aquí atrás.
You can tell people what we're watching.
A machete come out here.
¿Qué es lo que andas ahí? Puta, andas una pija ni mala, man. No, hombre, ahí téngalo, solo ahí téngalo. Ya te volaba el dedo este mes. Así te iba a dar para atrás.
If you want to pause it now, we can discuss it. So this is a video of 3 MS-13 gang members. The driver, who you can't see, is a source. He was the kid in the back seat was tasked with killing his friend, who they suspected of being a law enforcement cooperator. He was unsuccessful in finding the kid to kill him, so they asked my source to drive down to New Jersey and pick up the guy who's in the front passenger seat. He is a homeboy. He has killed several people. He is what they called the hitman for MS-13, and they were bringing him in to do the mission. And they are now sitting in front of that kid's house looking for him, waiting to come out, to jump out with that machete. The kid in the front seat has a gun, and they're going to kill him. My source was texting me consistently after they got back into Chelsea coming up from New Jersey. Are we okay to do this surveillance? Because if they see him, they're going to jump out. At that point, the task force, we had already had that kid moved out of the house in protective custody. He's now in witness protection because he actually cooperated with us. But that is them sitting ready to go kill. They had the machete. The guy planned it. He said, I'm going to come up from behind. I'm going to take my garrote. I'm going to start strangling him. You come with the machete, start hitting him. And then when we're done, I'm going to shoot him. And make sure you peel all over your hands before and after, because in El Salvador, we would do that to help make sure the gun residue wouldn't get attached to our hands after firing the gun. So that is an actual hit team ready to go out and kill some 18-year-old kid because they thought he was talking to law enforcement.
Jeff, this person, Moonflower, writes, I was a juvenile correction officer. The Latin King kid seemed to be brainwashed. No successful intervention. So do you find that to be the case where you just can't talk them out of gang life?
There are some kids that you'll never get to talk about. There are some that you can. I found, and Gary asked this question before, when I teach this, I come to Ann, I teach this with Ann, I teach this other places about gangs. When the kids join the gangs, and the reason what I said, hey, they join gangs for these reasons, my partner way back in the day termed it as the lie, right? You know, it's the lie. We're going to be your family. They're not your family. You go to jail, we'll take care of your wife and your kid or your baby mama while you're in jail. They're only thinking about, hey, you're in jail. I'm taking care of your baby mama because I'm going to be the one dating her now while you're sitting in jail, right? So it's that lie. So you have your hardcore true believe gang members. You have some that they come in because they need to and they become that true believer. But I've also seen kids in where they kind of start realizing the lie, and we've developed sources because they see that lie and they reach out to us and say, hey, how do I get out? Because if I try to leave, they're going to kill me. And so that's where we say, hey, if you cooperate with us, you're helping us get into the gang so we can take that gang off the street. But at the end of the day, we're going to relocate you, whether it's through witness protection, whether it's depending on the gang, whether we just move you to another state and get you set up to start your life again afresh. I've got some gang members who've done that, where one kid right now, he was young, he didn't have a father figure, and so he was making money selling drugs associated with the gangs. He got involved with a girl, got pregnant, had a baby. And I said, look, he doesn't have a real bad criminal record. Let's approach him and talk to him. And it was funny. We approached him. We knock on his door at 6 a.m. and we're telling him, you got a choice today. You're either going to go to jail or you're going to work for us. And he agrees to work for us. And it was funny because he had tried on his own to start leaving the gang. And to this day, when we talk, he and I still talk. He's very successful. But he goes, you changed my life. I was scared to death of you for the first couple of years. But now I know what you were doing and you got me out of the life fully. You made it where I couldn't go back into the life. And you changed my life around. He's married. He's got 4 beautiful kids. He's a successful businessman, making lots of money, more money than I make with his business. And it was, I can just remember when he showed up day one to buy drugs for us. So on day one, he brings this month-old baby. I sat there and said, what's this? Well, I'm stay at home. I'm Mr. Mom. I said, well, your baby. He goes, yeah, but we do it all the time. We drive to our drug deals, buying drugs, selling drugs with our kids in the back seat. And I'm thinking to myself, I can see the headline now. Drug deal goes wrong and a month-old baby's killed on the FBI's watch. No, you can't take your kid working for the FBI. And so for the rest of that year that he worked for us until we relocated him, one of the police officers who was a dad would babysit that kid while we were out doing drug buys or gun buys or doing other kinds of evidence gathering, utilizing this kid as a source. Now, I've seen with MS-13 a lot, and here's a thing, too, that's very different. MS-13, you have, and just to make it easy for us, you've got what I would say, you have this unaccompanied minor program. So you have El Salvador. Horrible. We've already talked about it. The highest murder per capita in the world right now. In 2015, it was around 108 people per 100,000 people were killed. That was the figure for per capita, right? Well, you have parents who go, or a mom, and the dad's in the States, or dad, or somebody watching the kids. I don't want the kid associated with gangs. I want to get them out into the States. So they send them, they pay the $5,000 to $8,000 to send this kid to the States. Once they cross the border, they're told, get to Border Patrol, turn yourself in, and then say, my father or whoever lives in this city. They confirm it, and then they'll move the kid up to the parent. So out of, let's say 100 kids are doing this trip, I would say the majority of those kids, and we'll just make it easy, 75 are purely innocent. No ties, trying to get out. They're on that train that they call the Beast coming to the United States. Now, you have the parents who go, oh, my kid is joining MS-13. I got to get him out of here before he becomes a full-blown member. Unbeknownst to them, though they're a paro, which is like their first phase, they're a member of the gang. It's already too late. They're a member. But the parents or whoever doesn't know that, puts them on the train, sends them up north too to do the same thing. So let's say, out of 75, let's say 15 are paros and jaqueos, which are low-level members. Now, what are we left with? 10 people left, right? So we'll save 20 people. So now we're up to 95. 5 kids who are coming up are those 15-year-olds who are full-blown homeboys. They're killers. They're serial killers. They're on the train. So now they're driving up on this Beast. Girls are being raped. It's horrendous. It's absolutely terrifying for these kids. The homeboys are directing the paros and jaqueos to find out everything they can on those 75 innocent kids. So once they arrive in town, now they have the recruiting pool. So the 5 go, they're becoming leaders in the different cliques wherever they're sent to. The 15 are starting to report back into the cliques that they're supposed to report into. And now they're all going to the high schools, and they sit down with all the other new kids coming in and saying, you're going to join our gang. Now, multiply, double that number and say it's 200 kids. The other, now you've got 150 innocent kids. You've got 20 MS-13 paros jaqueos, 20 18th Street kids in that same phrase, and then 5 of each. And they're directing each other. And so all these innocent kids are being forced into MS or 18th Street, wherever they go. And here they are, and they're being told, hey, you're going to join the gang. I don't want to join the gang. And then they go, but you're from San Salvador, right? Yes, this neighborhood, right? Isn't that your mom? And they'll show a picture of the mom. Yes. Well, tomorrow we're going to fucking kill her if you don't join the gang. Are you going to join the gang? Yeah. Why? Because you're coming from a place where there's no trust between the populace and the government. So you come here, you're somewhat in an illegal status, legal status. So there's mistrust of the police because they think, hey, if I come in and I talk to the police, I'm going to be reported. 3, how can the police protect my family in El Salvador when I'm here in the States? They can't. So they'll still kill my family down there. So now you have a group of kids who are coming into the gang who these are not the believers. They don't want to be. And this is where I feel bad because don't forget, they're on this train ride. They're making friends with everyone. So today I'm talking to MS-13, not knowing it. But tomorrow I'm talking to 18th Street, not knowing it. But now when I get to Chelsea, I'm hanging out with both my friends. I think I'm doing okay. I'll be safe. I'm MS-13. but I'm still hanging out with my buddy who I don't know is 18th Street, but now I post a photo on Snapchat or whatever, and now MS-13 sees it, and they go, oh, he's lying to us. He's not MS-13. He's 18th Street. So now we call him out and we brutally kill him. And so it's, when we did our case, my partner and I looked at it and said, hey, we have this underrepresented community of, they're living in fear. We're having all these, and if you go back and you look, Long Island, Maryland, DC, Boston, California, Texas, all these horrific murders where they're stabbing you 40 plus times, they're stoning you, they're shooting you. If you have some photographs from the slides, you can see the damage that are done to these knives if you throw them up there when they're hacking these people to death, right? Keep going, like right there. Look at the damage to that knife. And in this case, they were trying, and this is a different knife. They're trying to cut the kid's hands off. They're trying to cut his head off. And this is the damage they're doing is they're hacking because they're using his machetes, right? And so you've got this, and you've got some people who go, I don't want to do this, right? I don't want to. So they kill them. They think, because they're told the only way to leave for MS-13, the only way to leave the gang is to find church. And I have on tape where they say, follow these kids when they say they're leaving the gang. The day they don't go to church is the day you kill them because they lied to us. They didn't find God. We have on tape where, and this is where I will say it's different between an American gang and like these Central American gangs. An American gang, it's okay for gang members to talk to police. If I roll up on you as a gang member and we chit chat, but there's a bunch of you, it's all fine and good. But in El Salvador, if I roll up on a group of kids and I go, okay, I find somebody with a gun and I lock him up, and there was another gang kid there and he doesn't get locked up, that kid's the one who turned him in for the gun, and they'll kill that kid. And so we're seeing all this too. And so these kids are stuck between a rock and a hard place, and they don't know what to do and don't know where to go. And so for us, it was, we're going to go in here and do what we can to help protect that community. And it's like that for every gang. One gang, we had 62 gang-related shootings 6 months, for the 6 months leading up to an arrest of 62 gang members and leaders. For a full year after that, we had 2 gang-related shootings. So when we do these cases and when we're successful, you actually get to see the results of crime decreasing immediately after these takedowns.
That was in Lynn, Massachusetts, right?
That was in Lynn, Massachusetts, yes. And then for the MS-13 case that we took down in 2016, you continue to see the violence rampant around the country. But in Massachusetts, though there was 3-4 between 2016 and 2018, 2019, there was only 4 related murders instead of else.
And I want to get to lastly to the Boston Marathon connection, because that obviously affected the entire United States of America. Jody Johnson writes, I watch every show. My personal life is on hold right now because of it. So please call me a friend of the show. Of course, you're a friend of the show, Jody. She says her feelings were hurt. Just kidding. I will now refer to you as a friend of the show. Mabel Quintanilla is a big friend of the show. And Jeff, she watches from El Salvador. She says this is a sensitive topic and really complex. Children are initiated as lookouts for the gangs as early as 6 or 7 years old. Great panel. I'm going to try to bring up this video here. Let's see if we can play this.
Bro, I mean, you know, bro. Why, you got snaps?
And just tell us what we're about to watch, Jeff.
We are buying heroin. We just bought heroin from the kid in the front passenger seat, and he was a drug dealer in Cambridge area.
Oh, I thought this was the Boston Marathon, but we'll still.
No. He was good friends with Jahar Shanayev, the younger brother with the Boston Marathon bombers. There's 2 brothers, Tamerlan and Jahar.
Let's watch this, and Jeff will explain on the back end.
Well, damn, that's crazy, man. And this, bro. I mean, you know, bro. Why, you got snaps now? What you said? You said you're in a bad situation. Yeah, you know what Boston Marathon is about, man.
Bro, I didn't know if those girls told you. That was my dog who did that shit.
That was your boy?
That was my dog. That was my.
You went to school with him, nigga, because he was from Ringe.
Yeah, I know, bro.
Because he's your age.
Yeah, that was my best friend, bro. That was my dog.
What, like you hung out with him every day?
Yeah, man.
What the fuck was he thinking?
Bro, his brother clearly brainwashed this nigga.
Was he like that?
Hell no, bro. Bro, I chill with this nigga every day. Every day of my life. The realest nigga you'll ever meet. If he was here right now, he'd be like,
yeah, I can't believe you knew the nigga.
Bro,
she never told me that.
I'm glad I'm glad.
She kept her mouth shut.
Yeah.
It's better that she did.
Hey, so I told him that. They was just like, what the fuck? Like, bro.
You're lucky you didn't get caught up with them other two niggas that fucking hid the shit and got locked up. Whatever they did.
These niggas trying to bag me now, bro.
For what? What's that? Your phone?
Yeah.
Oh, nigga, throw it. You want me to put mine out there?
Yeah, throw it. Killed the cop.
The hammer that killed the cop was yours? Oh, nigga. What?
Yeah, bro.
What?
He told me, he's like, yo, I gotta fix it up. Let me borrow it. I was like, all right, sure. Hold that down.
So we
Oh, he
can
thought he was
pause
wrong.
it here if you want.
And then they try to rob him.
So one, I play this video that we have because I'm trying to show that gangs, again, they're involved in all different kinds of things. Here was a kid selling drugs, good friends with this guy. That kid had done an armed robbery using this gun before. His buddy Jahar knew about it, needed a gun for the Boston Marathon bombing, and said, hey, can I borrow the gun? I'm going to do a robbery. So he did. He lent him the gun 2 months before the bombing, and then, never got it back. And, I look at that in several other videos where we're still buying other drugs and stuff from this kid. My mind is, he said early on, like, yeah, the brother brainwashed him. The brother didn't brainwash him because of the planning that was involved, everything else. But I could see that this kid never expected his friend to do this. And he was looking for someone to forgive him. And he wasn't getting any forgiveness. So he was trying to confess to my source, because my source was a little older. Maybe he was kind of looking at him possibly as some kind of father figure, something to get that, like, hey, it's okay. You didn't know what he was going to use that gun for. You didn't know he was going to kill an MIT police officer. You didn't know. And it was one of those things where we needed to seek his cooperation, and he wasn't cooperating. So I was asked by the FBI to make a case against this guy to where we could get him to cooperate. And we did. Once we arrested him, he ended up testifying against Jahar Tsarnaev in court to say, yeah, I gave him the gun. And it was just one of those things to show that Jahar had been just as involved as his brother in the planning and execution of the Boston Marathon bombing.
Couple more questions. We're going to wrap it up. This one is from Donabella Valentino, and it is for Dr. Gary Bricado. Following up what Jeff is saying, Gary, would you say the young people joining gangs have a history of complex trauma early in life? Gary, I know you're not an expert in gangs per se, but just about everything else and everything related to killing. So how would you answer this?
Well, I think what's so interesting about this conversation tonight is it becomes clear that there's really a mixed bag of ways that a person could wind up getting pulled into a gang, where, as we were saying, some people simply have a kind of psychopathic personality formulation. Some people do it out of fear, some people out of culture, some out of need, desperation, etc. So that it seems to be multifactorial. I would imagine that some people have been exposed to deprivation and traumatic experiences. The thought that I keep having as we're talking about this is that it does seem that at least some of the people who get pulled into the gang, do appear to demonstrate what might be called a kind of an insecurity of attachment, meaning that, when we think about people who've been deprived of stable affection from parental figures as infants, and they have a tendency in life to go on and have difficulty trusting institutions, connecting with other people stably, maintaining relationships, getting their needs met, etc. You really get the sense of people whose attachment and security is so poor that there's something very attractive about this group that will hang on to you. As a matter of fact, usurp your life, take total control over it, but in exchange, there's a kind of a security, very similar to what we see in cults, for example. And I've always said that cults are a kind of large-scale abusive relationship. And in many ways, gangs are like that too. I mean, it's this sort of exchange for a sense of predictability in exchange for one's sense of self and identity. And I think that there's also trauma involved in participation in the gang for some people. Wouldn't you say, Jeff? I mean, I think people who try to get out of a gang, sometimes it's a nightmare where, there's a kind of, it's almost like coming out of the war, where a person has left this world in which there's a normalization, a desensitization to slaughter and crime every day and so forth. Or maybe they had power in the gang and protection, and now they're to try to go into ordinary life. It's almost unfathomable. But I think the answer is probably some of them have been traumatized. I would imagine so. But I imagine there are also gang members that haven't been. Wouldn't you say, Jeff? It's sort of a mixed lot.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I also agree with leaving the gang can be extremely difficult because gang members are killed for leaving. Some gangs like the Lion Kings, after you serve a good amount of time, you've been a good earner for the gang, you can get your golden gates and you kind of retire, but you're not fully retired. I mean, you can still throw knowledge back, you can still participate, but you're not active gang banging per se. But you're still you're not. It's a more retired type position. But yeah, I mean, leaving the gang early on your terms and not theirs can be a death sentence.
Hey, Gary, most important question of the night. J. Thomas Reset says his wife is watching this evening, and she is dying to know what the movie poster is over your right shoulder. So I would hate for her to go home this evening not knowing the answer to that question.
Oh, that's a movie poster for Leo McCarey's 1937 movie Make Way for Tomorrow. It had been a lost film for a long time and was released some years ago by Criterion. And it's a very poignant, beautiful story about an elderly couple that is separated because their kids can't take them both in. And the idea of whether they'll ever see each other again. It's an extremely beautiful movie, and I've always been a very big fan of the director, Leo McCarey, who most people know for The Little Rascals and Laurel and Hardy and comedies, but this is a very serious and dramatic film. But I'm a huge film buff. I've got those all over the house, so that just happens to be the one you're seeing. But there are loads of them. No Scarface posters, by the way. No appreciation of the villain here. But I appreciate the question. Yeah.
Jay, not only do I take care of you, I take care of your wife. By the way, Jay said he wishes 2 million people were watching. I just want to let everyone know that we passed 35,000 subscribers today. Thank you to all of you guys. I really appreciate it. STS Nation is the best. We really only pivoted into true crime full time after the Idaho murders, which was only November. So we are really picking up subscribers at a fast pace. And one day in the very near future, when we do this show, we will be the #1 true crime show in the genre. So thank you all very much. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm about to here. Solicitor Randolph, once again, who is passed away, but asking questions. This is a serious question. Why do you think we never got to see the basement tapes from the Columbine high school shooters? I have no idea if you know the answer to that, so I apologize for putting you on the spot. If you do, that's great. But also, that's the first real school shooting that I remember in my generation. I went to high school in the 80s. I don't recall too many mass shootings. So I know this is a little off topic, but what did Columbine do in terms of putting itself on the map when it comes to school shootings? And do you know the answer to that question?
Well, I do know that they are used as a model, a prototype, if you will, by other shooters. And we're finding that when you get into any of their laptops or whatever, you do know that what they've been researching and who they've been looking at. Those tapes, I know we've tried to get them because we're doing another project, but somebody's got them. They claim that they are destroyed, but I don't believe that. I think that that's just to keep people away. So I don't know who has them. Sometimes FBI might have them if they felt that they were either too that the public shouldn't see them. But I know that you can't get them.
I'm looking for this comment here. We have a good day from Australia, and then Lisa Randolph. You have excellent people on your YouTube podcast channel. Thank you, Joel. Anita Reyes, you two are a friend of the show. I see you on here all the time. So, Jeff, a final question to you, and I just want to get your final thoughts. We'll go around the horn to get some final thoughts. This might sound like a crazy question, but I know, like in the prison system too, I feel like these gangs are so organized and so invested in making money that if they actually came from a place of good, they could be successful business people like this guy that you helped save. Is that your take too? Like if they put this to good use instead of negative, would some of these people actually be successful in life?
Absolutely. As I said, I've sat down with a lot of the kids I've locked up with. I've locked up, interviewed them. They've decided to cooperate after being locked up. They're charismatic. They're funny. I could picture myself like hanging out with them, having a beer or something, right? It's just they chose a different path in life, and that's where I said before. It doesn't matter if you're from the inner city in a project. We've locked up kids who come from wealthy neighborhoods who join gangs, and people just make the wrong decision. My partner for 20 years, a trooper in the state police, he grew up in Lynn, and he said, I could have gone one way or I could have gone the other way. I was lucky. My mom was a strong woman, and she guided me to do the right thing. And he became the head of the gang unit for the state police before he retired. He and I were partners. We first met back during 9/11, and then we got to get working together on gangs in 2002 until he and I retired at the end of 2020. So, it's about the choices people make. And if they choose the right thing, they'd be good.
Dr. Gary Bricado, he has done just about everything. He studies serial killers and all the violent things in life. He is the author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. The New Evil, you better go out and buy it. Gary, on this Sunday evening, your final thoughts in relation to what was discussed this evening?
Well, there's so many different kind of rabbit holes we could go down with this, but I think first of all that comment was very intriguing about Columbine, because if you were to see what I write about partially in The New Evil is the way that we're seeing changes in crime over time and what that's about culturally and how it intersects with technology. And I really do agree that with the April 20th, 1999 killing at Columbine, which incidentally was the 110th birthday of Adolf Hitler, which I don't think was a coincidence. The idea was well, not the idea, that what we see is a transition to a kind of very American and very new type of offense. And as a matter of fact, from the late 1960s through the 1990s, the kind of crime du jour was serial killing, particularly sexually motivated serial killing. And all of a sudden, probably because of DNA and other technologies, there's a great decrease in people being able to kill that many people to become a serial killer by the late 90s. And then all of a sudden, we start to see this explosion of mass murder, particularly mass shootings, from the late 1990s onward. And they do not occur worldwide with the same frequency. It is a decidedly American phenomenon. And it's really fascinating to think about what that's about, the egotism, the kind of emoting publicly, the envy, all of that. And I think it is fascinating to think about what is going on in the culture and in the average individual to disinhibit people like that and to render them so brittle in this unique way, and so egotistical and so cruel, but in ways that simply didn't exist before. Part of the reason there's such an explosion of these, of course, is simply the availability of weapons that could do this, that could commit these kinds of mass shootings, those military-style weapons that came in the mid-'70s, commercially available. But it's fascinating that it wasn't until the late '90s that you start seeing people using them to go out and commit these mass atrocities. Quite fascinating. As a final thought, what I would say is gang activity is also increasing. I think there's something cultural there too. That something in the culture is creating individuals that don't have secure attachments, that are kind of looking for structure, that are looking for, that are less inhibited, don't really have a moral code in the traditional way. And I think that is a kind of a melting pot that is vulnerable to looking for some sort of meaning or structure. And gang activity is just one kind of awful path a person could go down who needs that. And I think, we've got to ask really difficult questions like, what is the effect of broken homes? What is the effect of the economy? What is the effect of, the glorification of crime, the narcissism of the era on this kind of increasing criminality in the larger swath of the population, particularly in gangs? I don't know what Ann and Jeff might say about that. But it is interesting to think about why there's so much gang activity now that you didn't have in decades past. And what is it in the culture that creates that void? I think this is a very difficult question and a powerful one worth meditating on as a culture. So that's where I would leave it for myself.
Well, Gary, you better address this final comment here from JP. Where can we purchase Gary's book? I don't see it on Amazon. What's going on there?
Oh, it's an Amazon bestseller. Often it is there. It's but probably the reason you're not seeing it is because it's under my co-author's name is Michael Stone, and it often comes up as Michael Stone unless you expand it. You see it under Stone, but it's Stone and Brucato, and it is there easily purchased on Amazon.
An Amazon bestseller. Buy 2 copies. Gary's family needs help. Maybe he'll give me some money. JP writes, great panel. Happy Sunday evening. Always learn so much from your podcast, Joel. Thank you to Ann, Gary, and Jeff. I said at the beginning, we have the best guests in true crime, but this is an exception because these guys and women are the cream of the crop. There are no better true crime guests than what you just witnessed. Ann Burgess is an internationally recognized pioneer in the assessment and treatment of victims of trauma and abuse. She's the author of A Killer by Design. She was named a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. She's worked with the FBI Academy. She has literally done it all. And the show Mindhunters on Netflix, loosely based off of some of the work Ann did with the FBI. So Dr. Ann Burgess, your final thoughts. I know we were kind of, Jeff was leading the way. We talked gangs, we talked a lot of different things, but your final thoughts.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the victims that, not just the victims, but the families of the victims. And I think we would love to talk about the families of the gang bangers, as you call them. I think they would give us the information that would probably be more enlightening in terms of why they went into the gang and how the families feel about it, because they probably left siblings, maybe to have left. So I've not heard much on just the structure of the families, but certainly then the victims that are shot and killed, how that is for their own family. So you really have so many, it's not just one person, it's just more and more victims out there. So my push is for how do we prevent it? How do we get to them first? One suggestion I have is you got to keep them in school. I think that if you can keep them in school and they get some kind of an education, that might put them on a better road, certainly, than to gangs. So those are my final thoughts on talking about gangs. I think we learned a lot tonight. I think there's so much more that we could. So I really thank Jeff for enlightening us all.
Thank you to all of you. This final comment from Obsessed for Disneyland. We bow to Ann with the prayer hands. So we all do bow to Ann. An absolute privilege. If you don't know Ann Burgess, you better Google the name and you'll realize what a big deal it is that she is on our show. We really appreciate it. Same to Dr. Gary Brucato, Jeff Wood, former FBI special agent. There's no one that knows more about gangs. Anna Nisa writes, love you, Dr. Ann. Just so you know, the Alec Murdaugh trial is expected to wind up this week with closing arguments projected for Wednesday. We're going to be on it every day this week, starting live tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Wednesday, throughout the week. And then we will be back with Great Scott. It's your True Crime Phil live show with Phil Waters and Scott Duffy of the FBI this Friday. And then Sunday night, a week from tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, my beautiful mother will be here, and we are interviewing the Greenberg family, Sandy and Josh Greenberg, whose daughter was stabbed 20 times, 10 of them on the back of her neck, back of her head. It was ruled a suicide. Something fishy is going on. Until then, love you, America. Gary, and hang on.